Got it. Yeah, and so you said filibuster. I think this is something that didn't really come up for me in my um, like vocabulary or knowledge until over the past like 5 years or so. Can you just explain like what it is and why it's important that we do dismantle the filibuster and get rid of it?
Well, I mean that's a whole separate but a related conversation. So the filibuster is a supermajority rule in the Senate that means effectively that, with very few exceptions, bills cannot be enacted into laws without 60 votes in the Senate. So it's a supermajority requirement as opposed to a majority requirement, which would just be 51 senators would be required under a majority requirement. The problem, well, there are many problems. Just broadly speaking, it's way too hard to pass a law in American society. We have 4 veto points already, which is the bill has to become law has to pass through the House, the Senate, the President, and survive judicial review. That's 4 veto points. That's more than most Western industrial countries. And there's a scholarly literature that shows that as countries have more and more veto points to pass laws, in other words, as it becomes harder and harder to pass laws structurally, law becomes less responsive, not surprisingly, to what citizens want. So 90% of the country wants background checks, and it's not even on the agenda because we have so many veto points. So that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that the veto points are already subject to minority capture or counter-majoritarian capture. And what does that mean? That means that the Republicans keep winning presidential elections even though they don't get a majority of the popular vote. Most of the conservative justices now were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. In the House, the Republicans don't need to win 50% of the popular vote to control the House. The Democrats need to beat the Republicans by 5 or 6 or 7%, which is a huge amount, in order to control the House, and even more so in the Senate. So in the Senate, Democratic senators represent 41 million more voters than Republican senators. So the Republicans can control each body, even though it doesn't mean they always control. The Democrats just barely swept to power, but it means it's much easier for the Republicans to capture control over the levers of power, even though they don't represent a majority of the public. And so what that means is that a tiny number of senators representing a tiny sliver of the public can block desperately needed laws. I mean, Barack Obama came in with 59 and then 60 senators and a national mandate for health care, and he almost didn't get health care. Not a single Republican would help him out. So it's already too hard to pass laws. Then you add on top, so because of the number of veto points and the vulnerability of each veto point to a counter-majoritarian or minority capture. So then when you add on top of that, the filibuster, which is a supermajority requirement within one of the chambers, so that's bad enough, and Southerners had been using the filibuster for more than 100 years. The filibuster is not in the Constitution, by the way. The founding fathers were very clear they did not support supermajority requirements because they'd seen how supermajority requirement had screwed the Articles of Confederation. But racists, white supremacists, put the filibuster in place basically to allow Southern senators representing a minority of the country to protect slavery and then later to protect Jim Crow. And so it had been used to do things like block federal anti-lynching legislation in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. The House kept sending federal anti-lynching bills to the Senate, and they died in the Senate, even though they had they were vastly popular, majority public support, but you just get a few Southern senators together and filibuster the bill. So that was already horrifying. But what's happened over the last 20 years is that the Republicans have come to abuse the filibuster such that they now filibuster everything Democrats want to do, and the only way to get around the filibuster now is once a year through a very arcane, weird procedure called budget reconciliation. It basically lets either side pass one law a year the law that meets very narrow criteria with 51 votes instead of 60 votes, but it can only be used once a year. Now, that's what the filibuster does. So in other words, now the Democrats want to pass H.R. 1. It has the support of all Democratic members of the House and Senate. But they can't get 60 votes for it. So we've got millions of black and brown voters who are blocked from the polls. We've got dark money coming in from untraceable dark money from corporations and even foreign governments. Nothing can be done about that. We've got hyperpartisan gerrymandering wasting millions of votes. H.R. 1 would fix a lot of that. And the Republicans are just saying, nope, forget it. So the filibuster is going to make it impossible to restore democracy. And the filibuster, of course, would be invoked to block a court expansion bill, even if every Democratic senator favored it. Now, I'll say one more thing about the filibuster, which is, and people don't understand this, but the filibuster, it's scary to think about a world without the filibuster, because when Republicans return to unilateral control, they will try to do, and they will do super scary shit. They'll want to privatize Social Security. They want to get rid of Obamacare. So the opposition to the filibuster, for many people, has been about protecting progressive laws from Republican dismantlement. What folks don't always see, however, is that it's not the filibuster that protects programs that Democrats have established. It's the popularity of those programs. And there's been a contradiction that was identified in American public opinion about 60 years ago, that the public doesn't like to set up new programs, but once the programs are set up, the public likes those programs. And so the Republicans, for example, tried to dismantle the Affordable Care Act under budget reconciliation. So they only needed 51 votes. They couldn't get the 51st vote. So it wasn't the filibuster that saved the ACA. It was the popularity of the program. And I would say the same thing about Social Security, privatizing Social Security. But the Republicans are able. So the filibuster prevents Democrats, for the most part, from building new programs, with a few exceptions here and there. But the filibuster does not prevent Republicans from doing what they want to do, which is tax cuts, because they can just use budget reconciliation for their tax cuts. So it prevents us from getting done what we want to do. It does not prevent Republicans from getting done what they want to do. And Mitch McConnell understands that, which is why he left the filibuster in place. It's not because he's an institutionalist. I mean, he proved time and again that he doesn't give a shit about norms and institutions. One final thing to say about this, and another way to think about this, is that if the Democrats had been wise enough to get rid of the filibuster in 2009, Obama's first 2 years would have looked very, very, very different. He already accomplished a lot in those first 2 years, but he would have gotten things like a public option for ACA, a climate change bill, fixed the immigration system, a card check legislation to make it easier for unions to organize, and way more. And the Republicans would have come in and they would have dismantled some of that, but on average, we would be in much better shape today. So the plan at Take Back the Court has never really been just about the court. It's been about restoring democracy. The logic being, and this is in our founding documents 2.5 years ago, you need to pass a democracy bill to restore democracy. To do that, you have to kill the filibuster. But if you only do those two things, the Supreme Court will destroy the democracy bill. So you kill the filibuster, pass the democracy bill, and then expand the court to protect the democracy bill from the stolen court.